Hello everybody, my name is Leo, and if you follow our channel, you know that we have done several videos about latency. For instance, one dedicated to the comparison of the latency of 23 amp modelers, one dedicated to the quad cortex, etc. This new video is fully focused on the new Fender Tone Master Pro latency management. First of all, if you want more info about what is latency and how I have measured it, you can check out the link in the card above. With this out of the way, let's jump straight to the results. We have an empty chain, I mean no effect blocks inserted, that takes around 2.5 milliseconds. If we choose a signal chain with one splitter, the latency rises to 4 milliseconds, and if we choose a signal chain with two splitters, the latency rises to 5.2 milliseconds. This means that even if you don't have any block in the chain, the type of chain you choose has an impact on the overall latency, which is kind of strange considering that no effects are activated in the chain. Maybe this is due to the mixers available in the splitters. Let's now use the simpler signal chain without splitters and check out the performance of the effect blocks. If we add an amp plus cab in a single block and we keep it switched off, we still have 2.5 milliseconds. Therefore, we can say that when an effect is switched off, it does not impact on latency, which is good. For instance, before our latency video about the quad cortex, the latency increased even for effect blocks switched off, and this behavior has been fixed with the last quad cortex firmware. The Tone Master is already okay, and this is good. Furthermore, if we switch on the amp and cab, the latency reaches 3 milliseconds. The latency stays at 3 milliseconds even if instead of the amp and cab we use an amp and then a cab in a different block. This means that at least in terms of latency they are equivalent. If we add a wah, a tube screamer, an amp, a cab, a delay and a reverb, the latency goes at 3.1 milliseconds. Therefore, we can say that the effect blocks are pretty efficient. Now, let's check out the impact of the 4 effect loops on latency. I have patched all the 4 effect loops with cables. Obviously, if we add an external effect in the loop, we have to add the latency value of the external effect to the overall latency of the Tone Master. With an empty signal chain without splitters and the FX1 activated, the latency stays at 2.5 milliseconds, and it stays at 2.5 milliseconds even if we added the second effect loop. Very good. External effects 1 and 2 do not add latency. On the other hand, if we add the effect loop 3, the latency goes to 5 milliseconds, and if we add the effect loop 4, we reach 7.3 milliseconds. If we remove the effect loop 1 and 2, just with the loop 3 and 4, the latency stays at 7.3 milliseconds. And with just the effect loop 4, we have 5 milliseconds. So here we have basically the effects loop 1 and 2, which are neutral in terms of latency, where both the effect 3 and 4 taxes our overall latency. Pretty interesting. Okay, let's now build a pretty complex signal chain with 2 splitters, a wah, a tube screamer, an amp, 2 delays, a cab, 2 reverbs, and the effect loop 3 and 4. We reach 11 milliseconds. If we take a look at a more, I would say, common signal chain with a wah, a tube screamer, an amp, 2 delays, a cab, 1 splitter, and the effect loop 3 and 4 for, let's say, an external delay and reverb, well, we reach 9.3 milliseconds, to which you have to add the latency of our external effects. So Summarizing, the basic latency with an amp and cab or with a wah, a tube screamer, amp, cab, delay and reverb is good, and is in line, for instance, with the Quad Cortex or the Kemper, even if it is worse compared to Boss, considering that the Boss units stays at around 1 millisecond of latency. The effect loop 1 and 2 can be used without impacting latency, where the effect loops 3 and 4 are taxing our overall latency. On the other hand, the single effect blocks are pretty efficient and do not impact too much latency, where the amount of splitters we put in the chain impact latency, even if we don't have anything in the loop of the splitters, which is an area that can be improved in my opinion. More complex signal chains with 2 splitters and the effect loop 3 and 4 activated may impact your overall playing comfort if you are particularly sensible to latency, and especially if the external effects you are using in the loops are gonna add latency time, for instance because they have an ADA conversion. In conclusion, this is a good unit, even if not among the best ones in terms of latency, and that has to be carefully used when you want to add external digital effects in the external loop 3 and 4, also having splitters in the chain. I hope this video has been of some help. Thank you so much for watching and see you soon. Bye!